He chose the hardest path and is now the most feared player in virtual reality. Using VR headsets, players immerse themselves in virtual worlds and become true inhabitants of these realms. These kinds of immersive games have become increasingly popular, but there is one that stands out above the rest, often referred to as a divine game with over 30 million players worldwide. The name of that game is Shangri-La Frontier. In the epic battle between Sunraku and Weatherman, the protagonist used his crescent vorpal to deliver the final blow to the Tombed Guardian, putting him to sleep once and for all. Through Vash, Sunraku decided to uncover the truth about the world of Shangri-La Frontier, but not before doing a favor for the Rabbit Master. Sunraku was tasked with repairing an object that once belonged to the Divines, but since only an ancient craftsman could achieve such a feat, the Blue Bird decided to transform Bilak into one, and Vash's daughter accepted the challenge without hesitation. Thus, the lover of bad games, Rakuro Hizutone, embarked on yet another journey to obtain a magical operations unit and turn Bilak into an ancient craftsman. Upon arriving at the desired location, Sunraku revealed the blacksmith beneath her disguise. Unfortunately for the poor rabbit, she had to travel the entire way alongside Aramis, the Wild Wind. Fortunately, with no one else around, Sunraku could drop his disguise and get more comfortable, and Emil returned to his original form to his own delight. In the ruins of past glories, the protagonist interpreted the strange architecture as resembling the bones of a living being, but from what he had gathered, it was actually a human creation from the Divine Era. Aside from this little piece of knowledge, Sunraku wondered why anyone would build such a gigantic structure, and why the civilization's culture had vanished. Perhaps they were fighting for something, or it could be related to what Setsuna had said, that the protagonist should seek Bahamut. Speaking of which, Sunraku considered that meeting that professor from the clan of scholars had changed his understanding of this world. Like Vash, that old man with the avatar of a young girl had offered to reveal the truth about the world by his side, sharing the information they had acquired to bring to light the mysteries of Shangri-La Frontier. Despite how bizarre that professor might be, he was right about one thing. The scene markers in Shangri-La Frontier were incredibly specific and difficult to uncover. Without a deep understanding of this world, it's almost impossible to find them all. This knowledge, by the way, would be crucial in fulfilling the conditions for the appearance of Lekin, the Night Striker, one of the 7 most powerful in Shangri-La. With that in mind, Sunraku accepted the professor's offer of friendship and pointed him toward a woman to tell the story of Weatherman. This woman was Pencilden, known to the professor as the Giant Slayer. While the professor was speaking with Schwarzwolf, contacting Pencilden might prove useful. Later on, Sunraku was thrilled to learn that the professor backed down upon hearing Pencilden's name. He thanked the woman for sacrificing herself for his gaming experience. Now he couldn't wait to play around with the items in his inventory as soon as possible. On that note, Bilek mentioned they had almost been discovered by the professor, something Sunraku disagreed with, though he imagined that the old man disguised as a young girl knew he was hiding something. After all, he wasn't a fool, especially considering his expertise in studying the game. It's likely he was simply too polite to press Sunraku during their first encounter. Regardless, they had arrived at the area they were meant to be in, and that was what mattered now. It was time to shift focus to finding a magical operations unit. Just then, Bilak interrupted the bird and his faithful companion to reveal that she had researched this area and discovered they needed to be extremely cautious of the endless stream of golems patrolling the perimeter. Speaking of which, just as the blacksmith finished her sentence, a divine golem appeared in the area and fired its flamethrower at Sunraku. Not expecting much from this opponent, given it was a work golem, the bird was almost caught off guard and nearly turned into fried chicken by the mechanized giant. In any case, Sunraku figured that though this golem seemed strong, it wasn't fast, and that deficiency could be exploited to secure victory. With that in mind, he charged at the opponent, but Aramis stepped in to show off as usual. With his Swordmaster's solo ability followed by his primordial slash, the vice-captain of the Booted Musketeers annihilated the machine without a second thought. Despite the Wild Wind's spectacular performance, Sunraku was furious that every potential item dropped from the golem had turned to dust, thanks to the cat's unnecessary display. Aramis casually remarked that he might have overdone it a little, prompting Bilak to smack him with her blacksmith's hammer, commenting that using a dragon-slaying attack on a mere work golem was overkill. As always, the cat begged the rabbit to spare his battered head, while Sunraku emphasized the need for him to refrain from using such powerful techniques recklessly. Speaking of which, Sunraku acknowledged Aramis' strength, but it didn't seem like that golem was much of a threat. Bilak wasn't too happy with that remark, reminding him that not all golems were as slow as that one, so it was wise to stay alert at all times. After all, the real challenge would come from golems born of the local elements. As if on cue, a rolling rock moved towards Sunraku's leg and latched onto his shin with a claw. The object looked like it was about to explode, so Bilek hammered it away just in time, saving the bird. As the explosion erupted in the sky, everyone realized they had narrowly escaped death. Sunraku wondered if that cursed ball had been an example of a local element golem, and the blacksmith reiterated the importance of staying sharp, as one could never know what these creatures might be capable of. Suddenly, Immerse catches his companion's attention, and the moment Sunraku lays eyes on what he's pointing at, he takes back what he said about Aramis not using any powerful techniques just yet. The protagonist says this because it seems like the perfect time for the group to use everything they've got. A golem, one that releases several smaller versions of itself just like the one that exploded earlier, has now stormed the battlefield. Without delay, these moving rocks charge toward their enemies, forcing Sunraku's team to focus on dodging these mobile explosives. Not only were they moving along the ground, but they also leaped into the air and exploded mid-flight, creating serious problems for everyone. Sunraku warns Bilak to be careful not to trigger a chain reaction, as an explosion in the wrong place at the wrong time could completely devastate the area. Besides, there's no point in fighting these rolling golems if they just keep coming endlessly. The real solution is to defeat their source. Surrounded by several explosive golems, Immerse uses his magic blade to destroy the approaching threats, while Aramis repeats his familiar sequence of swordsman's solo and primordial slash. But no matter what they did, more rolling golems kept coming. Outside of the swarm of walking explosives, Sunraku and Bilak notice that the white rabbit and the cat are the main targets. Sunraku figures the enemies see Aramis with his high level and the mage Immerse as the biggest threats, which makes him think the AI is pretty clever. Either way, they need to step in and wrap up this fight before things get worse. With that in mind, Sunraku charges forward, calling Bilak to follow. Since there aren't too many rolling golems near them, the bird can quickly approach the golem's source body. So far, the strategy is working, but just when it's time for Bilak to shine, he misses the strike with his hammer. The core leaked impressively, dodging the attack and grabbing onto a stone column several meters high, making things much more difficult for the attackers. In response, Sunraku could use the moon jumper combined with the six boats leap, but it's far too risky to prepare an aerial attack under this barrage. Meanwhile, Immerse is in greater danger by the second, so Aramis tells his lady's sister to relax, because he's here. Once again, using his familiar skill combo, he manages to hurl several rolling golems toward the column where the source body was perched, forcing it to jump again to avoid them. But this time, the golem has no place to latch onto and is about to crash to the ground within seconds. Bilak thinks this could be the perfect time to try that, so Sunraku draws the Flame General's Decapitator sword to see what this golem is really made of. As soon as the source body comes into range, the bird uses Brilliant Piercing to crack open the creature's shell and expose its core. With that done, Bilak follows up with his hammer, executing a material destruction move. The powerful strike sends the golem flying like a baseball, and immediately afterward, a massive explosion lights up the sky, forcing everyone to run for their lives. The blast creates a cloud of dust that covers nearly the entire area, knocking the group to the ground. Thankfully, they're all okay. Sunraku gets up after the battle is settled and picks up an item that dropped from the sky, courtesy of the source body. It's the explosive Earth Idol, which according to the bird looks like a silly-faced egg, but is actually more like a bomb. Naturally, he figures the best move is to stash it in the inventory and continue their search for the Magical Operations Unit. As they continue their journey, the team faces new obstacles along the way, overcoming them with relative ease. After defeating a metallic porcupine, Sunraku gets an item called the Idol that rejects the sword. It draws certain monsters' attention, and the more the Idol rejects them, the more interested the monsters become. Meanwhile, Aramis approaches Bilak once again, thanking the heavens that she's still alive. After all, she asked him to spare her head earlier, but now the cat gets a swift kick to the jaw to keep him in check. Sunraku observes that this totem seems to have a dynamic similar to what's happening between Bilak and Aramis. After this insight, the bird feels lucky to have the Decapitator sword at hand because, with the blades outside of its body, none of his other weapons can reach the core, and its durability is impressive. They soon continue their journey toward an underground passage so deep they can't even see the bottom. Meanwhile, Pencilgon and Katso are watching the group from a distance. The guy wonders what they should do now that they found what they were looking for, and the one responds that a little PK, player kill, is key. Hearing that, Katsu loves the idea. Back in reality, Risega visits Iwamaki, who's pretending that the game shop is now the rock roll fortune-telling house. With a fake crystal ball, Iwamaki asks if the girl's in love, and she blushes, admitting that she is. But Momo hasn't seen her love come to fruition yet, so she decides to predict her future with the crystal ball. Gazing into her magical promotional item, the fortune teller reveals that a new release dropped just 2 days ago and is currently on sale, a game that sparks passionate, divided opinions. Iwamaki points out that Rakuro is a fan of physical media, and this game is the only one around, so he'll be showing up at the shop any minute to grab his copy. Hearing this, Ri dashes to hide, and sure enough, the shopkeeper was right. Rakuro walks in looking for something new. He quickly spots Super Fun Fantasy, a game that looks like absolute garbage, which is just how Rakuro likes it. Once the boy leaves with his new game, Ria buys her own copy right after, ready to follow her love into the online gaming world. Returning to Shangri-La, Sunraku's group figures that the workshop must be at the bottom of that enormous hole, where they expect to find the magical operations unit. To estimate the depth, Bilek tosses an item into the pit, waiting to hear the sound when it hits the ground. It takes a few long seconds before the noise reaches them, confirming the massive depth. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice offers a rope. Without realizing it, Sunraku reaches out, only to see that it's Pencilgun and Katso. Realizing the situation he's in, the bluebird panics and tries to escape, but Katso uses his rope to lasso the protagonist, stopping him in his tracks. Since Sunraku ran, Pencilgun deduces that he must have read her message. Katso then asks the young man to say his last words. Distressed, Sunraku wants to know how they found him, so Pencilgun reminds him that he filled the inventoria with crystal scorpion materials. She also notes that she still plans to interrogate him about how he got so many, given that such items are only found near the Crystal Nest Cliff. At that moment, Sunraku freaks out, remembering that he shares the inventoria with these two, a crucial detail he had completely forgotten. Katso thought the bird was trying to trick them, which is why they came to the ruins of past glories. Bilek asks who these two are, and Emil explains that they know Sunraku. Katso then asks about the brown rabbit and the cat, prompting Aramis to eagerly introduce himself as a swordsman, but the rabbit quickly shuts him down before he can start one of his usual performances. Sunraku adds that those two are unique mission NPCs, with the brown rabbit being a blacksmith named Bilek and the cat a master swordsman named Aramis. With that, Pencilgun compliments the protagonist's progress, while Katso, fuming with rage, laments that he seems to be the only one in the game who hasn't found a unique mission yet. Pencilgun tries to comfort him, saying that luck plays a part in these things, but this doesn't calm him down at all. Sunraku then says he'll send a message with all the details later, and that he doesn't mind being their pawn, but he would like some help with the non-standard ether reactor. To fix it, they need an item called the Magical Operations Unit, which they believe might be at the bottom of this pit, so Sunraku suggests that Katso go bungee jumping to resolve the situation. The young man doesn't like the idea and wants the bird to do the dirty work, but Pencilgun sides with Sunraku and thinks Katso should jump with the rope too. Reluctantly, Katso gives in and prepares for the jump. He secures the rope to a stable base and begins his descent, while the others wait nervously. Bilek notes that diving into the unknown like this takes a lot of courage. Pencilgun adds that if things go south, he can just climb back up, to which the rabbit replies that people really are like pawns to this woman. Soon enough, Katso reaches the bottom and sees that the place looks like a sci-fi basement. Whatever it is, he shouts up to the group that he doesn't see any enemies, so the rest of them get ready to descend as well. A little later, when Sunraku is the first to join Katso at the bottom, Katso points out that while it looks like ruins outside, these facilities are still operational. Speaking of which, as he moves forward, he steps on something that triggers an alarm. Instantly, a robot is deployed as a security measure, and Pencilgun comments that this looks like something from Weatherman. Sunraku figures they're in for another one of those half-hour fights since, as Katso knows, this robot appears to have advanced technology. Either way, they won't be able to get past the door without defeating it, so Aramis steps up to face the enemy, confident that no foe can match his sword skills. He attacks with a combination of Sworvent Solo and Primal Slash, hitting the target squarely. However, when the dust settles, the cat realizes the opponent used a shield to absorb the impact, emerging unscathed. Bilek observes that this robot is different from the golems, but Pencilgun reassures the group that it's not a problem because they have 3 people here who've defeated one of the game's strongest monsters. With that, Katso announces this as the first joint mission of Wolfgang. Without delay, the first clan member steps into battle, using the Vorpal Blade technique, Moon Reflex V3. This attack hits the robot hard, dealing damage and slowing it down. Sunraku takes advantage of this opening to continue the offensive, but the mecha reacts in time, firing beams at the bird, forcing him to retreat. Bilek and Katso use the moment to ambush the enemy, but the robot raises its shield just before they strike. Seeing Sunraku near the door it's guarding, the robot shifts its focus back to him, firing lasers again. Sunraku realizes the machine's top priority is to protect the gate, not necessarily to destroy the enemies closest to it. Meanwhile, Katso and the blacksmith rabbit keep attacking the robot, but without much success. Next, it's Aramis and Emil's turn to intervene. The cat conjures Sworvent Solo, while the rabbit prepares an addition spell. Combined with Primal Slash and Emol's Magic Blade ability, this fusion of attacks creates a breach in the robot's chest armor. Pencilgun seizes the moment, throwing her spear with precision, piercing the machine's chest. Near victory, Sunraku remarks that while this robot might be tough under normal circumstances, Wolfgang is pure DPS, always going all in. Finally, with great effort, Bilek unleashes the Titanic explosion, Katsuo strikes with the Darkness attack, and Sunraku delivers the brilliant piercing blow. With that, the battle is won, and Pencilgun starts worrying that the group only relies on DPS and always has to go berserk to win. But the rest of the team doesn't seem concerned and celebrates the victory like there's no tomorrow. Pencilgun is relieved that her spear didn't even get scratched in that throw, and Sunraku asks if that's her main weapon. The woman explains that it's the Sacred Spear of Kalinvolf, one of the 5 heroic weapons in the game, which unlocks the hero class. Sunraku comments that Shangri-La Frontier is in trouble with a heroine like her, but she asks him not to say things like that, explaining that heroes are basically just like assassins, which doesn't really improve the situation. Meanwhile, Katsuo is struggling to open the door, but so far without success. Sunraku remembers the guy mentioned having a skill that would unlock it easily, but the boy with the female avatar warns that this technique is still at level 1, so the success rate is very low. Regardless, he tries once again to use his Ruin Sensor ability, which evaluates and unlocks their mechanism, but once again, doesn't work. Sunraku thought the robot would drop some sort of key when it was defeated, but Pencilgun explains that everything depends on random numbers. Hearing that phrase, Sunraku recalls having terrible memories related to it. Pencil then asks if he's talking about the game Chronicles of All Heart, because he couldn't get the necessary items to cure its heroine's illness and spent 3 weeks fighting random numbers. However, the bird prefers not to be reminded of that, especially because the game that made him the angriest was Chronicles of All Will Die. To change the subject, he asks Katsuo to try again, and by luck or fate, this time the ability works and the door opens. After analyzing it, Katsuo comments that the mechanism was designed to open by scanning a legacy weapon, and that's the difference between him and Sunraku. In response to the provocation, Sunraku snaps back, saying the guy is talking too much for someone who has never found anything unique. The group then enters the workshop and is amazed by the technology inside, while Katsuo gets his revenge for the Bluebird's insult. Pencil then can already smell the rare items, and Sunraku believes the magical operations unit must be around. With that, all the members start searching for the much-desired item, each one in a different corner of the lab. Sunraku presses a random button and activates a hologram of a monster never seen before and assumes this type of creature is what people use to fight there, especially since the Omega symbol this monster bore could be seen all around the workshop. This symbol is usually associated with supreme weapons, bosses, or things of that level. With that thought in mind, Sunraku still struggles to understand the world building here. As no one is finding the item and people are starting to lose patience, Katsuo asks at least what the thing looks like, so Bilek gives a rough description of the size of the magical operations unit. Emil puts some device on her head and asks Sunraku if it looks cool, but the bird suggests she throw it away, which annoys the bunny. However, as Bilek is explaining the item's shape, he suddenly notices the object on his sister's head and retrieves the mechanism. After celebrating with his partner for finding such a valuable item, Sunraku reminds everyone that time is money and gets ready to head back to Rabbits. But Pencilgun and Katsuo hold him by the shoulder because, as they said before, the bird still needs to stick around to discuss that message. Afterward, they leave the workshop and return to their journey, this time with Sunraku tied up by Katsuo's rope. Sunraku wants to know if people are trying to find him, so Katsuo explains that ever since their group defeated Weatherman, everyone knows they're connected, and it's the most annoying thing in the world being surrounded by beasts constantly asking about Sunraku and his bunny companion. Pencilgun shares that the leader of Schwarzwolf personally came with the attack holder to negotiate with her. Thinking about that, Sunraku asks if the people from the library haven't contacted them yet, and Pencilgun wonders if library is that clan of researchers. Upon hearing this, the bird freezes instantly, so the woman realizes he sold her out to that old man. Not knowing how to escape this mess, Sunraku explains that he just wanted to enjoy the game too, and though the situation is tricky, Pencilgun starts to think it might work out. Since they're already talking about it, Sunraku brings up the Magical Operations Unit event. Katsuo asks if Bilek will need Sunraku for it, and when the blacksmith replies no, the bird is thrown to the wolves. Pencilgun then tells the Magical Operations Unit to stay with the bunny blacksmith while they head to Eighthold. With that decided, Sunraku and Emil are left with nowhere to run. Once there, Pencilgun questions if Sunraku always wears that ridiculous sheet when he's in town, and he replies that it's the best way to stay disguised. Besides, since it's a headpiece, you can still use it with the Mark of Lycan. They then head to an empty alley to activate the portal to Bilak's workshop, where the magical operations unit will stay. After saying goodbye to her and Aramis, they continue their journey. On the way, Sunraku confesses to Emil that he wishes she would also go back to Rabbits because he doesn't know what Katsu and Pencilbin are planning. Pencilbin comments that she has plans for the bunny, so she needs her to stay. And just as she mentions this, a group of people with red eyes show an obsessive and irrational interest in Emil. Soon, they all charge at her wildly. Sunraku took off running as if he were the victim of a zombie attack. However, Pencilgon and Katsu held him back to prevent his escape. The bird screamed that he was being served up to the enemy on a silver platter, to which the two replied that Sunraku would have done the same. Realizing their predicament, Heat and Emil turned to see strange creatures crazily pursuing them. Yet the protagonist noticed he wasn't the target of this chase and callously threw Emil into the frenzied crowd. As if he were the last cookie in the jar, the rabbit struggled amidst the ensuing chaos and cried out, betrayed by Sunraku. The bird nonchalantly responded that it was nothing personal, because sacrifices are sometimes necessary. Katsu remarked that the citizens resembled fresh meat zombies, while Pencilgon admitted that without Emil, calming Animelia's fury would be tough. Suddenly, Momo appeared, stating it was an impromptu invitation. Sunraku was surprised to see Saiger Zero show up, as Momo confessed she had wanted to talk to the protagonist for a while. After all, she's the leader of the Wolf Schwarz clan, Saiger 100. Blushing, Saiger Zero bowed slightly in greeting to Sunraku, who awkwardly returned the gesture. Inside of all that armor, Reiseiga mentioned how Hizutome seemed cooler and stronger than before, even though it had only been a few weeks since their last meeting. Sunraku scratched his head, feeling an unusual pressure, while Pencilbin teased Momo for always downsizing her gear. Hearing this, Sunraku wondered if the two knew each other in real life, just as the professor arrived unexpectedly and thanked them for the recommendation. Pencilbin then announced they had a room at the Snake Apple branch in Crystal City, where they could discuss matters more calmly. Soon, everyone gathered at the establishment to address pending issues, and Pencilbin made it clear that Sunraku was the only one capable of answering Wolf Schwarz and SFZU's questions. Finally, she asked if it wouldn't be boring to have him on his tail all day. With that, Pencilbin urged them to get straight to the point, as everyone from Wolf Schwarz was seeking information about the unique monster Lekin, the night assailant. In exchange, Saiger 100 stated she was willing to offer a way to remove the marks of Lekin's curse, which intrigued Sunraku, who bore the scars of that battle. According to Saiger 100, the method was known, but it would be much easier to let their clan help than start from scratch. Sunraku replied he'd love to equip whatever he wanted, while the woman added that her clan's goal was to eliminate Lekin, though she was embarrassed to admit they hadn't yet managed to properly fight a unique monster. They had encountered Lekin a few times by chance, but always got thrashed before getting any useful information. Amid this revelation, Sunraku pondered how much to divulge. After all, the unique bonus scenario he kept for himself, the Vorpal Rabbit Epic, along with rabbits, didn't allow him to discuss Vayash at the Palace, the Rabbits, or Aramis, because the day Animelia learned about it, his peaceful life in Shangri-La would be over. At this point, Katsu made it clear he wanted to leave, while Sunraku reflected that he needed to look after the two, as they already knew about Bilak and Aramis, especially Pencilbin. If Sunraku shared even the slightest piece of information, this woman would pounce like a bloodhound. For now, the bird would limit himself to discussing Weatherman and Lekin, using these subjects to obscure the information about rabbits. Thus, he announced that defeating unique monsters by fighting them alone wasn't feasible. Taking Weatherman as an example, he explained that to fight him, one must accept the extra unique scenario. On this, Pencil then emphasized that unique monsters are at the heart of unique scenarios, and given that Lekin is a random encounter, even though there's a chance to fight him, it's quite likely they won't defeat an enemy of this level unless the correct scenario is activated. Saiger 100 highlighted that the condition for this could be found on the new continent added in the last update, while Pencilbin assured it wasn't impossible, though she thought it more likely that the conditions they'd find there would apply to the two still unknown unique monsters. Regarding the new continent, the professor hoped his wife, Massive Dynamite, wasn't causing trouble for Saiger 100, but the woman responded that she was the most excited of all about the new continent. The professor noted that from the information they had on unique monsters, the 7 most powerful discovered so far were, to date, Lekin the Night Assailant first, a black wolf found randomly. Or rather, it seems to be a she-wolf. Second, Carnid from the Abyss, a kind of giant octopus that lives in the oceans but no one has seen it yet. The information they have comes from NPCs stunned by the monster. Next is Seaworm, the ruler of the skies, a golden dragon that appears as a random encounter. Like Lekin, since he appears randomly, many people have seen this dragon, but since he flies, it's quite difficult to reach him. It's possible to fight him in the area of the magnanimous sanctuary, and it must be considered that this monster seeks heroes for a challenge worthy of him. Then there's Orchestra, the Infernal Echo, discovered in a book by a player who reached the royal library of the Kingdom of Inverth, which governs this continent. They say that Orchestra can control waves, cloak itself in flames, and provoke lightning. However, so far, only the name of this creature is known. So with Weatherman the Tomb Guardian, there are 5 unique monsters. In the midst of this discourse, Katsu tries to sneak away unnoticed, but Sunraku makes sure to stop him by force. The professor adds that they from the library have done all the possible research, but the truth is that all the information they have is already thrown on the net. About this, Pencilvan offers the Tome of Truth, Tomb Guardian version, packed with secret and never-before-seen information about Weatherman. Everyone around is startled by the revelation of such a precious item, while Arthas emphasizes that it is a super rare object, one she would never part with under normal circumstances. However, since the professor recognizes the value of such an item, she is willing to part with it in exchange for a show of good faith. And for those who didn't catch her meaning, she's saying she wants a hefty sum of money for this trinket. Without hesitation, the professor steps forward eagerly, ensuring her that he will pay whatever she asks, while Sunraku cynically comments that this thing turns into junk after you read it a few times. Regarding this, Katsu is sure that Pencil Gun is just trying to squeeze everything she can out of the old man. Then Saiger 100 speaks up about the situation. According to her, Wolf Schwarz is starving for information and Sunraku is the only one who can provide insights on Lycan. Sunraku confesses he doesn't know much. Nonetheless, Momo emphasizes that any detail is valuable, so he shares that the night attacker has very quick physical attacks, but they are still blockable. As for the attacks with its forepaws, they follow 3 patterns: diagonal, horizontal, and vertical. There is no delay between them, but there are plenty of safe zones to duck into. Sunraku assures he'll explain everything in detail later, but he hints that the bite is the most critical attack of this creature. The protagonist managed to avoid getting bitten too much, yet these bites have the corrosive attribute, although it's possible that all of Lycan's attacks have it. One way or another, one thing Sunraku can guarantee is that a single swipe from that she-wolf can tear your limbs into small pieces. Then there's an area attack that gets thrown like a spear on the battlefield. With that said, Saiger 100 asks to speak for a moment. She thought Sunraku had only fought Lycan once, so it's curious the man had analyzed all this from just one encounter. In response, Pencilgon and Katsu make it clear that the guy is a total oddball who runs around with a bird mask, and even this tacky nickname gets Rei excited as if it were the most attractive trait of a human being. When she learned that Sunraku was involved with Pencilgon, Momo was left wondering who he was, but now she's beginning to understand that Sunraku is the kind of player who can shake up this game. Speaking of which, she makes it clear that the guy can keep talking. And if he wants to write about it, that would be even better. With that, Sunraku continues his explanation, revealing that battling the night attacker is literally fighting a giant wolf, but there's a lot he still doesn't know. One thing he recalls is that the last strike he took from Lycan triggered a reaction he could never have imagined, especially considering he was sure he was out of reach. Sunraku thought it was an unavoidable attack, but he knows it isn't. What he's sure of is that Shangri-La is not programmed to have monsters that appear out of nowhere, and Momo agrees with this. After all, that would be common in a bad game, but since we're talking about a game that has devoted so much to its world building, it doesn't make sense for a monster to appear like that. In other words, this is some ability of Lycan that is still unknown. If he could fight her again, Sunraku would even try to find out, but it's not like you can find this monster just anywhere. After dropping this information, the bird thinks it should be enough because then he wouldn't need to talk about rabbits. Then, Saiger 100 invites the Wolf Gang to collaborate with Wolf Schwarz, but Animalia insists on discussing this later, so she asks if this is part of the initial question. Momo thinks it isn't, since she needs to talk to someone first, so Animalia announces that now it's her turn. After all, as a member of Esfazu, she just wants to know about the realm of Vorpal rabbits. With that, Sunraku jumps up from his chair in surprise, while the girl concludes that to maintain the honor of her clan, she needs to know everything the bird knows. Sunraku thinks she wants information about the unique scenario related to that city, so the girl reveals she wants to know how to get free entry to the land of the rabbits, precisely because there is a unique scenario called Journey Through Rabbit Country. But when the boss scenario, the rabbit-eating snake, is defeated, you're expelled and can't return. However, Animalia points out that Sunraku not only took a talking rabbit from rabbits, but also can come and go as he pleases from there. If the boy tells her how to do this, she is willing to do anything in exchange. With that, Sunraku thought Animalia wanted the conditions to unlock the unique scenario where he befriended Emil, but since the situation is different, he concludes he can figure something out. Maybe he can tell her how he unlocked the rabbit country invitation. But in the end, he states that Emil can explain this better than he can, so he'd love it if the girl returned the rabbit. Following this, Sunraku and Katsu try to wake the poor creature, who was violently cuddled by Animalia all this time, but not even with a carrot was this possible. Since that's the case, Sunraku pulls Emil's ear and tells her there are special rabbits parfaits at will, all paid for by him. This time, the rabbit wakes up desperate in search of the parfaits in all her innocence. Taking advantage of the success of his plan, the protagonist delves into the topic of rabbits, about how it's possible to send players there who are capable of getting rid of the snake. Sunraku wants to know if it's possible to invite these people back to rabbits after they leave. Regarding this, Emil explains that it depends on the government of the rabbit city, but her brother, Edward, might be able to pull that favor. After all, he is the king of rabbits. Sunraku ponders this last bit of information because he thought Vash was the leader of rabbits. Then he asks if it's possible to speak with this rabbit, and Emil assures him that yes, while she rushes out of the meeting to arrange this encounter. With the rabbit's departure, Sunraku wonders if he should leave this question for when she returns, but Animalia doesn't have another choice. Meanwhile, the professor pays 100 million mani for the Tome of Truth from Pennsylvania. After that, she requests an alliance among all the clans present at the table.